Welcome, everyone, to the Men's Yoga Podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Mike De Massi. Mike is a professional musician and a yoga teacher based out in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And Mike, tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're from.
Yes, as you said, I'm a musician, a performing musician. I started in my early teens playing music and then went on to college and university. I completed even a master's degree a few years ago in jazz performance. Yeah, and implicated in the jazz scene here in Montreal. I play some musical theater. And somewhere along the way, I became interested in yoga, so I started delving into that. First, primarily for physical reasons, because I thought it was brought to my attention that it can be of benefit to musicians physically, and it really did. When I first started exploring it, it really did open up my conception of how I approach my instrument at sort of greater intelligence physically. Um, but it wasn't until later on that I started becoming more curious. Well, what is there beyond the physical aspects of the practice? And yeah, and I was just kind of a yoga detective, wanting to know who is the teacher of the practice, who's the root teacher of the practice that I was learning. I was very diligent Iyengar yoga practitioner for many years, and I wanted to know who was Sri Krishnamacharya, the teacher of BKS Iyengar and of Patabi Joyce, etc. So yeah, just doing so much research, trying to understand that, and trying to understand what yoga is beyond the physical. And I stumbled upon this master teacher who's still alive, Srivatsa Ramaswami, who learned directly from Sri Krishnamacharya in 1955 in Madras, which is now Chennai in India, and he stayed with him for over 30 years. So I felt that what he's presenting is a pretty full picture of what Krishnamacharya was actually teaching, because B.S. Iyengar admits he only stayed for a short time in actual learning of yoga from his guru. Otherwise, Iyengar was a brilliant innovator in his own right. And so yeah, so I set out to go learn from Srivatsa Ramaswami. I just couldn't help myself
Wow.
and it's just unusual because I'm a musician by vocation, but I just was, I guess, very motivated to go learn from this gentleman and continue to learn from
Was he
him.
related to him?
No, not Srivatsa Ramaswamy. It's not family. BKS Iyengar, as many know, he's the brother-in-law of Sri Krishnamacharya. His older sister married Krishnamacharya,
Right, right.
but he was
What
younger. He's much younger.
what was I'm curious when you mentioned about yoga, like expanding on your in you being a musician. What was like? What were you told, or like what was the experience supposed to be? Bringing yoga into your life with that.
Um, yeah, well, at that point, it was mostly a technical thing, like trying to be more efficient with my instrumental technique on my instrument, trying to be free to then play musically without any physical hindrances.
Mhm.
So trying to become more aware, more embodied. That was mostly the initial um, entry point to the practice.
Wow, cool. So, what is a day typically in the life of Mike right now? And the reason we ask this is just so we can relate it with, everyone, basically.
Right. Um, yeah, well, so it was a little different with the pandemic and all, but stuff is slowly starting to open up. We'll see with this
Yeah.
new variant what will happen, but yeah, stuff optimistically has opened up, and it's starting to seem like a semblance of what it was pre-pandemic. But yeah, so I have a busy performance schedule, you know, playing different projects, um, and and recently I was sort of inspired to want to share what I've been learning in yoga, and fortunately there've been few people that were interested enough to want me to share these things. So for as long as there's people interested, then I'll share it with these weekly practices that I teach online. Sometimes I meet with people in my city, but mostly it's been online anyways. So yeah, so I'll be performing evenings or weekends, and then as far as yoga teaching, I have these weekly practices that I teach, and I try to practice yoga most every day, ideally in the morning.
What is your
So,
self? Do you have a self-care practice?
um, so do you want to know like what do you want to know exactly? The
I guess
nitty
mean
gritty,
like
or
what is like a daily, do you have like a daily routine for like self-care? Is there certain things that you do to kind of to keep your yoga practice going, or do you include other things as well that you consider that maybe like meditation or other things like that that you feel yeah, is just looking after yourself?
yeah, I mean, I start my day just doing a physical yoga practice that leads into pranayama. Since learning from Ramaswami, I realized the value of practicing pranayama, and I feel it's a bit of a shame that it's not uh, as as well practiced as the asanas. Many people are practicing the asanas, but not so much the pranayama. So this is something I try to highlight when I'm sharing. It's a very important part of what Ramaswamy is teaching, and he says it was a very important part of Krishnamacharya's teaching. So it's just unusual that it just is not highlighted so much nowadays.
Mhm.
So then pranayama naturally leads to a short sit for meditation, and I try to do that as as an integrated practice most every day. Um,
How long does that roughly take?
it could take yeah, it could take 90 minutes or more, but if I'm short on time, I'm becoming more open to try to figure out a way to do something more compact. Because I mean, this is the other thing with our fixation on asanas, and I felt this as an Iyengar practitioner. Um, I wanted to get to all of the different asanas that I have been learning or practicing up into that point, and I would sort of do a set routine that rotates different asanas day to day. And then I felt, well, I have to do everything, so it will likely take 90 minutes or more to sort of practice all of these asanas. But now I'm realizing I don't really sure if I have the time. I'll practice all the asanas and try to get through it through like a few weeks time, get through rotating out different asanas. But now I'm seeing more value in breath in general. So I'll, if I have less time, I'll likely just take the time I have to enjoy um, the simpler postures with the really full breathing aspect in it, which I wasn't really aware of how to do with my prior Iyengar background. Nor in my exploration of Ashtanga Vinyasa, there wasn't so much this breath emphasis as much as I learned with Ramaswamy. It's more of a long breathing approach that with slow movements that I wasn't exposed to, at least not in Montreal, Ashtanga Vinyasa community.
Is there a pranayama practice you do like or you find most beneficial?
I think it's sort of personal based on the individual, and this is something else that I'm learning from. I mean, I'm talking a lot about Krishnamacharya teachings, but this is kind of what I'm most passionate about. But I'm realizing Krishnamacharya teachings is really about individual application.
Right.
And the one of the sons of Krishnamacharya, TKV Desikacharya, really highlighted this aspect. Um, there's a few pranayamas like Nadi Shodhana, which most everyone understands in principle, the alternate nostril technique. Inhale left, exhale right, exhale left. Sort of thought to be pretty well balanced, but if you're not coming from a point of balance, then you might have to have some sort of a pranayama that helps bring you to that sort of homeostasis. Yeah, there's different
Nice.
techniques, you know. But Nadi
Nice.
Shodhana is like it's always mentioned in the texts, you know, it's a very fundamental pranayama technique. If you're going to start to do kumbhakas, the breath retentions, then again, that's pretty specific to the individual. What can they do? What are they trying to develop? For what reason? What function? What purpose?
Now, how was it for you when you first got into yoga? Like when you stepped onto the mat, was it something that, oh, you dove right in, or was it a come and go kind of thing?
Um, yeah, so when I explored it in college days, um, I I recognized that I enjoyed it and I wanted to continue to practice it at some point, but I left it open to at some point, and I was so involved in my music studies that I never really got into a regular routine at that time until years later. But I always was telling myself at the back of my head, you know, that would be nice to get back to that because I wasn't even doing any exercise or anything. I was just busy with my music studies and getting to gigs, which is a sort of an endeavor if I'm going with public transit with my gear, my instrument, and everything. So that's somewhat physical, but I was definitely not an exerciser. I was never really into any sort of exercise routine or athletic stuff. So yeah, it
Um,
was good that I got into a more regular thing with yoga because I realized, yeah, I mean, everybody says it's important to do some form of exercise, otherwise the body's just going to deteriorate.
right, right. What has changed in your life since you've been practicing yoga?
I feel well in my body. I feel embodied, just an understanding physically. Digestion is smooth. Um, the philosophy, which is really what I'm delving into the past few years with Ramaswami's teachings of the Shastras, the texts, is really making me realize the implication into my work as a musician. You know, the whole aspect of cultivating the mind, which I think is relevant to everybody. It's a shame that not more people are even delving into even basics of yoga philosophy, because it's much like what the Buddha talks about, Patanjali saying the same thing, like what is the root of our suffering? Buddha says it's our attachments, you know. People are
Mhm.
not willing to sort of face themselves, then sure, then maybe philosophy isn't for them. But I think everyone at a certain point may come to a point where they realize they're suffering, you know. That's all across the board. And it's not just useful for people taking a yoga teacher training, you know. I think it's relevant to every person if they're open to inquiry and questioning. So yeah, that's probably the biggest way it's impacting me now, you know. So that
Wow.
I'm still practicing a lot of asanas because I'm young and I can do it. If I have the time, I'll try to develop into different forms. I'm not inventing asanas. I'm just practicing classical asana, but but I'm putting sort of less emphasis on them the more I get into it.
Right, right. If someone was coming to you to or asking you about diving into philosophy, where would you point them? Like, is there a
Um,
book or a site you would say?
well, I mean, there's this fundamental treatise by this sage Patanjali, who authored the text, the Yoga Sutra,
Mhm.
about 2,000 years ago, which is one of these classical philosophical systems based on the Vedas. There's six, it's thought to be six classical systems based on the Vedas, and yoga is one of them. There's also a school called Vedanta. There's a school called Sankhya, which is quite closely related to yoga. And this treatise, Yoga Sutra, is basically expounding on the yoga, this philosophical view of yoga, and it's kind of describing in a fairly clear manner methodology of meditation. So it's interesting that what has come to be known as yoga is less so about meditation, uh, and more so about physical exercise, which is then maybe more hatha yoga. Not to say that Patanjali isn't addressing the issue of asanas, because he does. So then, but then I don't know. It takes. I hope I'm not all over the place, but I feel that
No, not at
people
all.
also. I just feel like people need to realize that Hatha yoga is meant to lead to Raja yoga, or at least this meditational um, yoga having to do with the mind, which is what the classic Hatha yogis all say. So, so Patanjali's yoga, Patanjali yoga, um, is a good place to start. It sort of helps to have someone help understand the sutras because they're very terse. So it always helps to have a sort of a guide on the first reading. There's also these classical commentaries that have been expounded on these sutras, and there's a series of classical commentaries, and there's even more contemporary commentaries. Um, but just going with what the sutras are trying to say without delving into multiple commentaries, there's a lot there, and with proper guidance, it can help person understand. Um, yeah,
Now, did you travel to LA to learn from Ramaswamy?
yeah. He obviously grew up in India, but he eventually has had a home in New Jersey because his sons moved to the States, and for a series of a few years, he's been doing programs at this university in Los Angeles called Loyola Marymount University, and he does these intensive programs there in the summers. Well, not since the pandemic, of course, and yeah, I just set out to go learn from him in that context in an intensive program, couple of weeks, full days of learning.
Oh wow, that must have been an awesome experience.
Yeah. And then since then, he's been doing online programs. So just taking online programs with him, which has been a bit of a boon because um, otherwise, if travel was the case, then it would have necessitated me taking less programs, less opportunities to learn from him. There would be more factors involved in terms of travel and lodging and all. And now I'm able to attend multiple programs in a single year to learn from
Yeah,
him. So this kind of a boon.
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What has been your biggest takeaway learning from him?
Um, let's see. Um, maybe the of the breath and not to deal with the mind itself. Maybe if I had to simply put it, the breath and the mind.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's
And then
great.
of course there's like yeah. And then of course there's like it's a nice system the way he presents even the asana practice, which is very breath centric. but there's a nice progression. He shows us how to practice even the asanas, which is not unrelated with what we do see with the Iyengar yoga and Ashtanga Vinyasa, but it's also got its own um, uh, beautiful logic to it, which is kind of cool.
Is there a sequence that they have? Like, do you work with breath first, then samasana, and or is there like different sequences?
That's a good question. The way Ramaswami sir teaches, he tends to start with asanas and then leading to prana, and then pranayama could lead to meditation. But some teachers within Krishnamacharya tradition, I've realized, teach pranayama asanas and then pranayama at the end even, which then could to meditation. But so it depends. Some people like doing pranayama at the beginning, or if you like, you can start straight away asanas and then do pranayama later. Then then that's how Ramaswamy tends to teach it. Definitely pranayama at the end, for instance. Um, and there's also um, something to do with the mudras, which is a subject that I guess not many people talk about neither.
Yeah.
But I mean, pranayamas and mudras, they're kind of parallel subjects. Having to do with what hatha yogis are saying. So if one wants to understand what is hatha yoga, then you read this text called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika of Swatmarama, in which there's a definitely explaining more physical oriented practice, the asanas. It's delving a little more elaboration to the asanas, which Patanjali sort of briefly mentions, but puts more emphasis on other elements. Whereas the hatha yogis, they say, okay, these are different asanas you can practice, giving different functions or different things that you can uh, attain with different asanas. Then they also describe pranayama, and they also describe mudras, and the mudras are these sort of energetic seals. So the way Ramaswamy often teaches us is that we practice asanas, and we do um, uh, mudra practice, which is a certain bodily positions, not different, not so much different than asanas, but it's more breath focused, and you actually try to stay in the asanas themselves or the mudras themselves for a period of time, really focusing on the breath, and then the pranayama, etc. So yeah, there's like inversion to invert, like the shoulder stand, headstand, shoulder stand. These can be thought of as mudras if you stay in them and you do this kind of approach
Really?
with the breath. Because there's also variations one can do. You can move your legs while in the inversions. You can
Right.
do lotus or whatever you want while you're inverted. But if you stay in it and you practice with this breath focus, and particularly in applying bandhas while you stay in the asana, mudra, and in the yogis they call it viparit karani mudra. So both the headstand and the shoulder stand can be considered viparit karani
Oh wow.
mudras. Yeah.
Oh neat.
There's
So
also other mudras, but yeah.
yeah, that's great. Um, well, what are you currently offering for people? I mean, what you've this is a great explanation and breaking down so many things for us today on the podcast. What are you currently offering for people?
um, yeah, like I teach these weekly classes, like Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. I have these classes and try to accommodate different people in different time zones. So like here I'm in the EST, Eastern Standard Time, Montreal. Um, so Mondays and Wednesdays I teach a noon class, which I guess in France is 6 o'clock in the evening, early evening, and then if you're in LA, you can attend that. It's 9 a.m. Then Saturdays I have a 10:30 a.m. EST class, which uh, yeah, then it's, what is it, 3:30 for UK time, or 4:30 for France time. Right now, sometimes I offer an 8:30 a.m. Saturday class just to accommodate if there's people wanting to join from India. It ends up being a little late for them, but it's like 7 p.m.
Right.
if they want to join. But I've had people from India wanting to join, so I try to accommodate that in my schedule. So yeah, just regular classes. I don't have any special programs. Other people that have learned from Ramaswamy, I would not hesitate to recommend highly as well, because some of them are also teaching more specialized programs, like program delving specifically in specific topics. Um,
Do you teach
yeah,
into
as they've been
do you
learning
teach
them
the philosophy as
from.
well?
I haven't had the formal opportunity to do so. I try to interject a few brief elements or concepts in a practice session that I lead, but for the most part, that's more practical, more practice oriented. So I haven't had formal opportunity to necessarily teach a group through the philosophy. I'd love to, but yeah, I'd
Yeah,
love
that'd
to
be
maybe
great.
even teach like some sort of a program where we go through each and we chant it together. Because this is another aspect Ramaswamy said when he learned these texts, he learned to chant them with his teacher, with Sri Krishnamacharya. They would go through it, and he would chant one word, and he would repeat it, and then he would go through each word of the sutra. Then they chant the whole sutra, and he would repeat it. Then he'd get into the meaning of each word. So it'd be cool to try to present it in that way.
Well, yeah, we forget sometimes how physical sound can be too at the same time, right?
Mm. Yeah, and me as a musician, I sort of kind of appreciate that aspect of the sound, and yeah, the significance of the sound and all of that.
Where can people find you?
Um, I don't have thing. I'm super. I don't know, low key, but I don't actually have a website, but I have a Facebook page. I should
Okay.
get a website probably, but I have a Facebook page called Vinyasa Krama Yoga Montreal. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I'll put those in the show notes so people can hit you up. And yeah, well, Mike, thanks so much for being on the podcast with us today and sharing your knowledge and your experience and your journey with us. I'm sure a lot of people will find it valuable, and a lot of people should be reaching out to you to learn more. And again, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.